Spending spring break in Jamaica, Queens, New York, not the Caribbean, was not what any of the family had in mind. This, the last family spring break, at least while both children were still students, had been carefully and painstakingly planned by their mom, my wife Brenda. She'd taken care of all the details for the 10-day, 3-city Italian vacation that had been in the planning for officially 6 months, but really for several years. Unexpected was the spring snowstorm in the northeast United States. As we sat in the Fairfield Inn near JFK Airport with flight after flight to Europe canceled, our patience grew thin. Finally, after a delay of almost 2 full days in Queens, we were on our way to Italy. Adjustments were made to the schedule. The overnight in London was canceled and Rome was cut short by a day and a half. But finally, the vacation was back on track. One of our first stops in Rome was the Vatican, and our first site visit there was Basilica di San Pietro, also known as St. Peter's Basilica. As I entered with wonder the world's largest Christian church, whose construction began around 1450, I was overwhelmed. The cathedral, which will accommodate over 60,000 people, is the home of over 100 tombs, including those of 91 popes. Before St. Peter's Basilica, as we know it today, the first basilica was ordered by Emperor Constantine and completed in 349 AD. He ordered it to be built on Vatican Hill, the location being symbolic as the burial place of the chief apostle, St. Peter. Some 1,400 years later, Pope Nicholas V ordered the restoration and enlargement of the church based on plans by Bernardo Rossellino. Work ceased after the death of Nicholas, and the first stone of the new basilica was not laid until after 1500. Pope Julius II appointed Donato Bramante as the chief architect, and in 1546, Michelangelo succeeded Bramante. The cupola, or dome, of St. Peter's, over a third of a football field in interior diameter and rising to 394 feet above the floor, approximately equivalent to a 35-story building, is one of its most impressive features and is commonly known as Michelangelo's Dome. Ironically, the project took so long to complete that the dome was not completed until almost 30 years after his death, and had been redesigned due to structural concerns by Giacomo del Porra and Domenico Fontana, considered the best engineer of the day. It took decades to complete the cupola, but it took over a century to build the basilica. The building of St. Peter's might be the greatest enterprise ever undertaken, and today we might have described the project as a nightmare. From the laying of the foundation in 1450, construction was started and stopped as various regime changes took place. A dozen or so chief architects oversaw the construction during different time periods. Bell towers were constructed, then removed. The cupola was designed and redesigned many times before actually being undertaken. And even then, experts at the time were concerned about whether it would be structurally sound. At least 7 popes came and went while the project progressed. Even so, pope after pope, architect after architect, persisted, persevered, and endured, and after 176 years, Pope Urbanus VIII solemnly dedicated the church. There I stood in the splendor of the most important Christian structure in the world, whose beauty was created by many of the greatest artists of all time, within the walls of which were entombed nearly 100 popes. As I contemplated the St. Peter's Basilica and the time it took to build, I thought of the 2 days delay the Longstreets had encountered in trying to get there and the annoyance we all felt. Can you imagine if the dreamers, popes, architects, and builders of this cathedral had been as impatient as we tend to be today? Perhaps this, one of man's greatest architectural achievements, would never have been completed. You can be sure that the next time I'm delayed, I'll remember the lessons I learned by our trip to the Vatican. As the proverb goes, Rome wasn't built in a day. Neither was the magnificent St. Peter's Basilica. Likewise, as I see it, patience like that exhibited by the Romans might just lead to some of the greatest wonders in our lives. I'm John Longstreet with another edition of the Longstreet Beat. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you again next time.